Goo can enhance your gameplay, create completely unique strategies, and even be incredibly fun to mess around with. There are some good guides on YouTube, but as the game gets more complex and approaches Season 2, I wanted to make the most in-depth and up-to-date Goo guide there is. Today I'm going to teach you guys every Goo tech in the game. I'm sure I'll miss a couple, but this should cover a lot of the basic and advanced tech. I've learned a lot of this from you guys in comments, so as we go, I'll be giving some credit where it's due, but I have to give a big shout out to Akazo. A good chunk of the tech in this video is only here because of his videos and personal help. Thank you guys, let's get started. You cannot goo an enemy APS turret as it destroys goo shots, but you can goo guardian turrets to completely nullify them. Although maybe not as useful, you can surround friendly APS turrets with goo to potentially protect them and increase their survivability. The goo also completely disables things like the motion sensors. As we discovered in episode 2 of Mythbusting Mondays, dome shields deflect goo away from them. This means you cannot shoot goo through them, but this doesn't mean you can't use the goo to move them. You can easily move friendly dome shields if you're not happy with their placement, but you can also move enemy dome shields. You just have to get inside them first so your goo won't deflect away. Along with moving dome shields, you can actually move teammates or enemies' revive trophies. This is one I don't see too often, but you can move them to places that may be more difficult to revive or for an advantageous position. Goo doesn't stick to the revive trophies, so unfortunately you cannot simply cover them up, but you can surround a trophy with goo to buy your team some time or make your opponent's lives more difficult. You can goo landmines to nullify them just like the turrets, but what's funny is you can goo a landmine straight out of the air. If you manage to pull this off, it creates a completely new entity unlike other goo. Goo that collides with a mine mid-air doesn't stick to other goo and probably has some other insane properties, but I'm gonna have to excavate more on this one another day. You can also use goo to disarm mines, C4s, or even entire nukes. If done properly, the explosions will still occur, but they won't damage you or your teammates. This can be particularly helpful when there's a bunch of mines and C4s surrounding a cash out. A lot of people may already know you can use goo to stop someone from stealing a cash out. You just have to make sure when you goo them, you cover their head or line of sight. I made the mistake a few times of gooing their feet thinking I interrupted their steal, but in reality, they continued stealing. You can use this same exact tech to interrupt a revive. If someone is close to finishing a revive and you don't have time to kill them, one goo shot or grenade is all it takes to completely cancel it. You can also use goo to block access to things. You can goo any elevator, lift, or move buttons around the map, including the cranes, which completely stops an enemy from using them until they break the goo. If a building has already taken some damage, you can amplify that damage with goo. If you goo any point and keep gooing until it reaches you, it forces the goo in the direction you're looking and can force structures along with it. We used this in our first episode of Mythbusting Mondays and our 5K special episode, and this is one of the most fun techs with the Goo Gun. You can also use the same tech with the crane to send the crane flying across the map. I don't want to dive deep into this today since this isn't a Goo tech, but by placing barricades in the cockpit of the crane, you can turn the crane into a Beyblade, destroying literally everything. While it's doing this, you can use the Goo tech to push it around. It was just too funny not to include in the video. If we can destroy skyscrapers using the goo, of course we're able to build them as well. If you combine multiple techs, you can create a fully functional skybase. The first tech is that the goo sticks to many of the outer barriers around the map. You can use these as a quick escape or as a vantage point near the cash out. Because goo can only branch 15 blobs from its source, having the outer wall as a source proves incredibly useful. Using the outer wall and a building, you can build a skybase. Now, I know I just said you can only goo 15 blobs away from a source. Thanks to Ed21, I learned you can actually bypass this restriction using goo. If you place a barricade on goo and then start a new goo chain from that barricade, you can create an infinite chain of goo that never breaks. This can be used to make extremely long bridges or build straight up to the sky on any map. If you shoot these specific goo blobs from goo grenades and canisters, you can destroy the entire wall instantly without having to shoot multiple blobs to clear a path. Just remember, if someone throws one of these at you, it's going to be the opposite end's blob you need to shoot. Another property of goo canisters is when they're shot or detonated mid-air, they make a new kind of goo structure that falls to the ground. A super interesting tech I learned from Savage in my comments is that using the jump pad in Guardian Turret, you can create a floating goo island. Just put a turret on top of a goo canister and then drop it onto a jump pad. While it's in air, just shoot the canister and it creates a floating island that won't fall no matter what. You can use this to to place turrets, snipe from, or just have another vantage point. This was a super cool find. I learned an insane property of the Guardian turrets while doing this. The turret, when bouncing on a jump pad, will go through all floors, walls, and barriers. This had me dying of laughter when I pulled this off in game. You just gotta place a turret on goo above a jump pad, then break the goo, and the turret will bounce infinitely on the jump pad, reaching crazy heights, and will even shoot enemies in the process. The APS turret doesn't go through floors like the Guardian turret does, but if you do what I did here and use it near a staircase, you can have the APS covering more area, which could actually be incredibly powerful. On heavy, you normally can't crouch walk into any of the holes or vents that mediums and lights can, but there are dozens you can fit into if you have goo. Just goo slightly below any hole or vent, and you can crouch walk right through these with ease. Here's a small movement tech to launch yourself with goo. Place a goo on the ground and a second goo connected to the ground, but also closely connected to the first blob. Then place a goo on top of your first blob and climb onto it. Then just break the first blob, and for whatever reason, this sends you flying through the sky. Hitting players with goo will stop their momentum completely. This does not matter if they're in air, on a platform, or just on the ground. This means you can completely freeze somebody on a zip line just by gooing them. If somebody is taking a jump pad to a new island, you can goo them mid-air to freeze them and cause them to fall to their death. You can even do this on the floating platforms. If you goo someone's upper body, they will be stuck in the air and the platform will just leave them behind. These are all super easy ways to get some eliminations using goo. Don't forget, you can also just goo somebody normally, and while they're stuck, you and your teammates can damage them. Although it's not as useful as other strategies, you can goo yourself to create a small temporary barrier. If you need a couple of seconds before your health regen kicks in, maybe you could use this to help buy yourself some time. Just be careful, if you goo your head, the goo might break itself quickly, and then you'll be left with your feet stuck in the ground. Goo moves the cash out effortlessly. This can be helpful if you wish to hold the cash out in a different room that better suits your team. Maybe you don't like the elevator or moving platforms cash out. You can just move the cash out to a preferable location. Although be careful trying to get the cash out off of the moving platforms. This can be a little tricky and the cash out station can be very stubborn. We know you can move the cash out with the goo, but you can even move it off the map if you'd like. Using goo, you can go off the sides of the buildings and the map and create goo platforms that can catch and hold the cash out station. If you goo the line holding the wrecking ball, it will snap instantly. This allows you to do all sorts of things with the wrecking ball. You can move it around freely using goo. You can use the wrecking ball to destroy buildings and even bounce it off of jump pads. The wrecking ball will destroy floors that explosives or guns never could. This allows you to create openings leading you right underneath the map, and there are dozens of these spots on every map. If you want to see more or know more about this, you can check out my last episode of Mythbusting Monday or others where we delved further into this. You can also attach barricades to the wrecking ball to amplify its destructive properties. You can use the wrecking ball to directly push yourself under the map or through walls. You can do the same thing to the cash out station to force it through walls as well. Again, both of these I cover extensively in my last couple Mythbusting Mondays. A new GOO Tech I learned from Akazo was that you can replicate a lot of the properties of the wrecking ball by just using a barricade. All you gotta do is place a barricade on goo and destroy the goo. An unattached barricade destroys everything it's pushed into. You just gotta use goo to push the barricade into buildings, and I was amazed at how fast this destroys structures. I was able to use this to create an even newer death ball that I could stand on and roll into buildings to crush them. This has got to be the funniest installment of our death ball. I also discovered the giant spheres on Las Vegas have the same properties of that death ball I just created with the new Barricade tech. You can use goo to push these into buildings and deal massive damage. They're so big it can be a little hard to roll them around, but man, this was just too funny, and is another tech I was crying tears because of how hard I was laughing. The final tech in this video I think has a well-suited name from Akazo, the Wipeout tech. I wanted to showcase this for you guys on Las Vegas, but unfortunately, Las Vegas tripwires and turrets is currently disabled. This works best with Las Vegas security turrets, but thankfully, I can show you guys the same tech using a regular Guardian turret. All you gotta do is attach goo strands to the turret. As the turret rotates, the goo will follow and do crazy things. If a player gets caught in this goo, it doesn't break itself like other goo normally does, meaning it can be very easy to kill enemies who get trapped in this goo, as they probably won't think to break the goo right away. This goo also has the ability to ignore walls entirely. However, the cash out station gets shoved around by this goo. This can allow the turret to break walls or even shove the cash out station right through walls. Thank you for watching. Next time I see you guys will be in season 2. I cannot wait.